this before. Anybody can go to projectcamelot.org, which was, the original website of Kerry Cassidy and Bill Ryan running Project Camelot. You can see me in multiple videos on Project Camelot interviewing insiders with them. I also did 3 different Project Camelot conferences in which many of their top insiders actually came forward, and I was at the same conference, therefore I was speaking to all these people. So in addition to that, you can go and see on record conversations I've had with Dr. Stephen Greer. I did his radio show on World Puja Network, in which he confirms that I was at the Disclosure Project event in May 2001. I got it like literally 2 or 3 weeks after I was on with Art Bell the first time. That's what made me a VIP. And there were 39 witnesses, 39 insiders who had high-level security clearance, and they all came forward in a press conference briefing at the National Press Club on May 9th, 2001. I wasn't invited to that, but there was another event that was taking place the next day on May 10th, which was called the Closed Executive VIP Summary Briefing for Members of Congress and their aides and VIPs. It was called the Closed Executive Summary Briefing, VIP briefing. And I was at that briefing. In fact, Helen Thomas, who had been in politics ever since the 1960s.
The Helen Thomas, the correspondent?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
She organized it. She knew that Kennedy had been assassinated. She was a good friend of Kennedy's. She knew that there was big cover-ups going on, and it was her leverage that got that into the National Press Club in the first place. And I sat directly behind her when these people were testifying in front of members of Congress who were in the audience. And I can tell you that these congressmen, when Sergeant Clifford Stone got up there and described his work with extraterrestrial crash retrievals, where he was part of a rapid recovery team that would actually go to a UFO crash, and he was the first guy to actually make contact with the ETs that were found in the ships, and it was generally a telepathic contact where he would empathize with their pain and actually feel the equivalent pain in his own body, whatever they were feeling.
You're talking about Clifford?
Yeah, he broke down in tears, and I can tell you that there was not one person in the audience who stayed in their seat when he got a standing ovation to come back on stage when he broke down in tears.
I'll say this. Clifford was on this show a couple of months ago, and he broke down, and he got me, and he's one of the guests that it's been a few months since he was on the show, and there practically is not a day that goes by that somebody doesn't see or listen to his show, on YouTube, or remember his past show and ask for him to come back on the show.
Of course.
And yeah, he's a very, and the thing is about Clifford, you just want to like him too.
Oh yeah.
He's a very compassionate guy. And I told him, I said, Clifford, quit calling me sir. And if you call me sir tonight on the show, I'm disconnecting the interview. Okay, sir, I won't. I'm like, dude, please, Clifford. But he is, okay. I'll go with you on that.
I walked right up to him because I had watched the video. It was the largest streaming demand that they'd ever had from the National Press Club server. It actually crashed the server. And so I had just seen everybody, and then I drove to D.C. from Virginia Beach, so it was a decent 4-hour drive.
Right.
And I had these brand new shoes on, and they'd actually cut my ankles to the point that they were bleeding because I didn't realize that new leather is going to ruin your skin.
Right.
But I ran into this briefing. There's blood in my socks, and I'm meeting all these people, and it was totally amazing. So if you go to the Project Camelot website, one of the most high-level insiders that they ever got who actually did come forward, in fact, probably the most knowledgeable guy who actually did put his face out there, is Henry Deacon.
Yes.
Which is a pseudonym, but there is a Zurich conference video you can watch where I was in the audience, and I ended up getting brought up on stage with Dr. Brian O'Leary, who was a trained astronaut for NASA and was going to go on a mission, and then they passed it up for some reason at the last minute. But he was a NASA astronaut. He's now deceased. But he did a whole elaborate presentation on free energy. And I went up there with him to help co-present. During the time we were up there, unbeknownst to anybody in the audience, Henry Deacon was there, and we had just pretended that he was a family member, so I was calling him Uncle Mark. And people were asking, my Uncle Mark what it was like to grow up with me and have me as, his nephew or something. But
Henry
then
Deacon.
all of a sudden,
yeah.
people find out it's not Uncle Mark. It's actually this guy, Henry Deacon, and he comes up on stage. He shows everybody that he's got this American passport, which I had seen up close, that was brown instead of blue. It was an official passport. And he went up there and disclosed his identity. And the thing is that you can go to the Henry Deacon page and see that there was a whole enormous amount of stuff that he was leaking to Camelot that had never come out in the form of a videotape interview, but the scope of his testimony was incredibly vast. And then the reason why I contacted Camelot in the first place, although it blossomed from there, but the original reason was just to get to this guy, because he was so amazing. And what he said is that although the military-industrial complex is highly compartmentalized, meaning that each of the different departments that people work in, they don't know what anybody else is doing in any of the other departments. You have one job, you move this object from point A to point B, and you do it all day long, and that's all you do. Or whatever it is, So he was at a level in which all the compartments melt apart, and people know the real scope of what's going on. At that level, most of these people either live in an underground base or off-planet. There are some people who are lucky enough to be able to still live on Earth and go to work and come back from work, and he was one of those people. So he reported that he would go to a series of different military bases, some of which were overseas, some of which were in America. You park your car. It's like a normal day. You go through the checkpoint. You say hello to the guy. And then what happened is that he said you would go through this thing called the corridor, and there's some military guys at the front of the corridor. There's like 5 levels of security you have to go through. And they have to do a retina scan, they do fingerprint scan, and they also ask you questions that you have to answer intelligently and correctly because they're very concerned about people that are not real people trying to get in. So part of it is you have to be able to have an intelligent conversation. So he would then walk down this corridor after he made it through that checkpoint, and it was a round hallway with kind of these scalloped ribs going down, like circles that are a little bit narrower than the rest of the cylinder that you're walking down. And then you get to the end, and there's this stairwell off to the left, and then there's an elevator. And for most people, if you don't know anything and you just go into the elevator, the door opens really slowly, you get inside, the door closes really slowly, and there's one button. It takes you up one floor, and the time that it takes the elevator to go up that floor is slower than it would take to walk up the stairs. So if you don't know anything, then you would say, well, why the hell would I want to take that elevator? It's so boring, it's so slow, it's not even worth it. What you don't realize is that people who are at the right level of security clearance, they will have a special key, it looks just like an ordinary metal key that you'd use to open up a door. You'll have that key on your keychain, and you'll have some sort of badge or special electromagnetic thing that you carry with you. And in that case, you go inside the elevator, the door closes, but then in this case, you take your ordinary metal house key and you put it into a lock that's inside the elevator. The elevator on the inside looks just like brushed chrome, like aluminum-type colored metal. You turn the key, And then what happens is the elevator reads the card that you carry with you, and that tells the elevator to send you wherever you need to go. This technology apparently is an offshoot of the Philadelphia experiment, which was a failed test of teleportation technology, and of course it had terrible effects on the crew.
Well, okay, let me jump in.
Yeah.
You're not referring to up and down. You're saying anywhere you need to go.
Exactly. So the Philadelphia experiment was a situation in which there's a guy, Jerry Vassilatos, who wrote about this, and he leaked it from insiders. And I've had 2 others or 3 others confirm this now, that Norfolk Naval Shipyard, they were testing high-intensity welding, and at the very, very high-intensity electromagnetic fields, they had all the lights go off in the factory. They couldn't figure out what was going on. Then they noticed that when the lights came back on, that some of the tools were missing. So this kept happening on some of these high-intensity welds for battleships they were building. And they eventually did high-speed filming and found out that when the high-intensity arc was made, that a little black hole would appear in the air, and the tools in the room, like hammers and screwdrivers, would start flying into the hole, and then the lights would go down. So that was the origin of what led to the Philadelphia experiment, which was essentially high-intensity electromagnetic coils that were inside a ship, as well as other coils aimed at it from outside the ship. And it did apparently teleport the ship. According to Colonel Philip Corso, it was actually a minesweeper ship called IX-97 that was teleported from Norfolk up to Rhode Island and then back down to Norfolk again. And it did apparently appear around Philadelphia as well, hence Philadelphia experiment. Some of these guys got embedded in the hull of the ship, and because the people on the ship, like if you didn't remember where the ship was, when you go into this teleportation state, everything turns gray, and you could walk around, and you could end up walking into the hull, and then when the ship reappeared, you might actually find yourself dead because you're now embedded in the hull. And that did happen to some of these people. But this is the government we're talking about, and so some human casualties are not about to stop them from perfecting a technology.
No, exactly. and back to my point, though, you know, they're when you're at that level, you have a different set of morals,
right?
And you know, for us, like I said, the guy that owns the Subway shop. That's making sandwiches. Well, you know what? Your ethics and your morals are on a whole nother plane to somebody that is, literally building instruments of destruction and profiting from that, and their lifestyle is, the Ferrari that they drive or whatever comes from a whole nother set of income. And for them to expand, for them to increase profits, right, and to return to the shareholders is bad stuff. Totally. Really, really, really bad stuff. But they still manage to go to sleep at night and raise their children and procreate. Yeah, it's frightening. Okay, I want to let's change gears. We're going to take a right turn right now.
Okay.
Last week I had on Kevin Tedeschi.
Oh my gosh. Yeah,
great show, by the way. A great show. And so Kevin and I, and for everybody out there listening right now, who was Kevin? Well, Kevin was he's the CEO of Edgar Casey's ARE.
Yep.
Amongst other things, great guy, and it was a great show. And so we're talking, and somehow you came up very briefly, but and we only touched upon it for just a second, and then I told him that you were going to be on next week, but anyway, so I want to back up. Do you mind talking about the Edgar Casey reincarnation book? Can we touch upon that a little bit?
Not at all.
Okay.
I've never actually had his name outed before associated with this, so that's a bit awkward because he was essentially the main opponent to me in the ARE back when I presented myself to them.
Right.
And he has a very derogatory view of me. So.
Well, he didn't last week.
Oh, he didn't?
No.
Really?
No. So yeah, but like I said, we just talked about it very briefly. In that he, or maybe I had mentioned, there are numerous people. We were talking about reincarnation specifically, and there are. You're not the only person with that association, and that's how it came up. And he said, I think he said the number was around 50 or so. But anyway, let's talk about the book.
Okay.
And how. And this is the direct question: how did you even start to figure that out, or have that thought? Let's go back to that. I mean, because that's an intriguing morning when you wake up and start to have that type of vision or thought.
Yeah, it's very difficult for people to understand what it would be like to be in the position that I found myself in when I went to the local branch of the Edgar Cayce Association. It just so happened that the only Edgar Cayce Association that you could go to that was an official part of their organization in the entire Northeast of the United States was at this guy Skip Weatherford's house, who literally was like a 5-minute drive from where I lived in Rosendale, New York. He lived in the next neighboring town. There was hardly even, I don't think there was one stoplight between my house and his house. So that was weird enough that I could go to this guy's house that was like the ARE mainstay for the Northeast. And as soon as I walked in there, we had an immediate rapport. I had already been doing psychic readings by this point, which is a long story, but I would be able, it actually started from people that I met through the Art Bell show and going on Richard Hoagland's discussion forum. There was a guy named Joe Mason who now has a website called greatdreams.com, and he talked about a technique that he was using called the dream voice, where he would wake up in the morning, and when he could still remember his dream, he would hear this chatter in his mind that seemed to be kind of nonsensical, but the idea was you don't analyze it, you just capture whatever you can hear and write it down without any bias or prejudice. And I then combined that technique with the remote viewing protocols that were leaked by some of the guests on Art Bell, including Dr. Courtney Brown. He wrote a book, Cosmic Voyage, that had a whole appendix in it that described exactly how to remote view. So I combined those two techniques and basically did a form of remote viewing where I focused on getting words instead of images. Most remote viewers use it for images instead of words, but I did it with words, and really, really remarkable results started to happen. It appeared that there was some intelligence that was speaking through me that was myself, but it was in some senses a much greater enhanced version of myself, like most people would think of the soul, the part of you that's beyond a physical body, the part of you that knows what you have to do on this planet, knows that you have a plan, knows that you have a goal in mind, and is the part of you that is actually writing your dreams to give you spiritual messages. It's sending you visions and omens and synchronicities and making sure that you meet the right people at the right time. And I'd had a lot of these type of things happening.
Okay, let's back up for a second, and okay. I'm curious. You said words instead of visions, and I get that, but when you're saying words, was it something that you were or somebody was writing down, or was it spoken to you?
Okay, good question. If you have ever had an experience of talking to one person, like let's say somebody's listening to our show right now, and they're listening to you and me talking, but they also have a TV on in the other room, and there's some commercials. And you can kind of hear those commercials if you listen to them, but you're not paying that much attention. The research that's been done in the classified programs, one of the things they found was that musicians are much better at this technique than ordinary people Because, for example, what I'm now doing with fingerstyle guitar, I'll play a complex guitar part and be able to sing at the same time. So I can divide my mind into these two compartments. It's a similar technique where your conscious thoughts represent like the conversation that you and I are having that somebody would listen to on the radio.
Right.
But then there's other information that sort of flickers around in the background, like the TV that's on in the other room. And the goal of really good meditation is to quiet down the normal conversation that is your conscious mind so that all the stuff that's on the periphery becomes a lot louder and a lot easier to hear. So what I would do is I would listen to the stuff in the background by toning out my conscious mind to the point where it wasn't interfering very much. I mean, I still had thoughts, and I would just push them away. And listen to the background, and then in the beginning I was writing it down by hand, and fairly soon I evolved into actually recording it on a cassette tape recorder. Just with a pause button, I'd unpause it when I'd hear something, and I'd say it into the tape recorder, and then pause it again and wait until I got the next chunk.
Interesting. How do you differentiate from bogus chatter? If you
This is something that becomes pretty obvious once you have experience. What I will say, though, is that the technique does involve that you use everything. Every single thought that comes through your mind, you take down, whether you think it's good data or not. The idea is there's a certain preferential state that you want to reach called mind awake, body asleep.
Right.
Where you get so far out that you actually have an eyelid locking reflex. People don't realize this, but in order for your eyes not to pop open while you're having a dream, your body has a natural mechanism that will seal your eyes shut. And it's very difficult to open them when this locking reflex takes place. You want to get yourself so deeply entranced that the locking reflex actually happens, and if you try to open your eyes, you'd have to really push to get them open.
I do that when I'm driving. It's amazing. So, but is this channeling, or it's not really?
That's one term that people have called for it. Although I think that term has been so widely widely misused.
Right.
But you got to remember that in Tibetan Buddhism, it's called termas, and these great Tibetan monks, it's well documented for centuries. They've been doing this. They will download an ancient scripture, and if they don't get every single word of something that might be several thousand words long, if they don't get every single word exactly correct, they fail the test. And then what they'll do is they'll go off to some weird old shrine and dig out these scrolls that nobody's looked at in a couple hundred years and blow the dust off.
Right.
And pull them out, and then you have to be tested against those scrolls, and you have to get it 100% accurate. So there's a historical precedent for people being able to pull stuff in this way very, very accurately.
Right.
And, of course, the Edgar Cayce readings are an example that's unparalleled in modern history, where you have a guy who was hypnotized, and he'd go to sleep, and in an unconscious state, he would speak under hypnosis, and all you'd have to do is give him somebody's name and address, and they would agree to be at that address at a certain time. And this reading would then give them a complete diagnosis of their medical condition and prescribe a treatment that invariably was a holistic treatment incorporating spiritual healing as well as physical healing.
The fascinating thing I think for most of us with Edgar